I never expected to fall in love with a man in his 70s. Hell, I never expected to fall in love with a man at all. But Professor Theodore Hartwell walked into my life during my sophomore year at Columbia, and everything I thought I knew about myself quietly unraveled and reformed into something I didn't recognize but desperately needed to understand. It started in September, the kind of crisp autumn day that makes New York feel like the center of the universe. I was running late to my first day of English Literature 301, classic American poetry. I'd signed up because I needed the credits and the time slot fit my schedule, not because I had any particular passion for poetry. I figured it would be an easy A, some dusty analysis of dead white guys writing about nature and mortality. I had no idea I was about to meet someone who would fundamentally alter the trajectory of my entire existence. I slipped into the back of the lecture hall, just as class was starting, trying to be invisible. The room was one of those old Columbia classics, wood paneling and high ceilings, the kind of space that makes you feel like you're part of some grand intellectual tradition, whether you want to be or not. And there he was at the front, Professor Hartwell, arranging papers on the lectern with careful, deliberate movements. He was 73, I would later learn, though he carried himself with a vitality that made age seem irrelevant. Tall and lean, with silver hair that caught the morning light streaming through the tall windows. He wore a navy cardigan over a crisp white shirt, reading glasses hanging from a chain around his neck. When he looked up at the class, his eyes were this startling shade of blue, sharp and knowing and somehow kind all at once. "Good morning," he said, and his voice had this quality I can't quite describe. Warm but commanding, like he was inviting you into a conversation rather than lecturing at you. "I'm Theodore Hartwell, and for the next 15 weeks we're going to fall in love with words together. Some of you will resist. Some of you are here because you need the credits, or because this was the only section that fit your schedule. That's fine. Love often finds us when we're not looking for it." Something about the way he said that last part made my stomach flip. I told myself it was just good rhetoric, the kind of thing professors say to make their subject matter sound more interesting than it actually is. He started talking about Walt Whitman, reading passages from Leaves of Grass in that resonant voice, and I found myself leaning forward, actually listening. The way he spoke about the poetry wasn't academic or dry. He talked about Whitman's words like they were love letters, like they were secrets being whispered in the dark, like they mattered in some fundamental way I'd never considered before. Whitman wrote, Professor Hartwell said, "I am large, I contain multitudes." What did he mean by that? That we are not singular, fixed things. We are vast and contradictory. We contain every version of ourselves we've ever been and every version we might still become. The self is not a prison, it's an endless frontier. I wrote that down in my notebook, my hand moving almost without conscious thought. An endless frontier. Something about those words felt important, though I couldn't have articulated why. After class, I found myself walking slowly, letting the crowd thin out before I left the building. I wasn't ready to return to my regular life yet, to the noise of the campus and my roommates' endless gaming sessions and the general chaos of being 20 years old and pretending I had everything figured out. That first week, I went to all 3 of his lecture sessions, even though I was only enrolled in 1. I told myself I was just really interested in the material, that Professor Hartwell was an exceptional teacher and I wanted to absorb as much as possible. I didn't examine too closely why I felt a flutter in my chest when he smiled at a student's question, or why I noticed the way his hands moved when he talked, graceful and expressive. By the 3rd week, I was staying after class to ask questions. They started as legitimate academic inquiries about the reading, but gradually they became excuses to talk to him, to be in his presence a little longer. He never seemed annoyed or rushed. He would lean against his desk, giving me his full attention, treating my half-formed thoughts about Dickinson or Frost like they were worth serious consideration. "You have an interesting mind, Adrian," he said one afternoon. That was the first time he used my name, and hearing it in his voice did something to me I wasn't prepared for. "You're not just reading the words, you're reading what's underneath them. That's a rare quality." I felt my face get hot. "I don't know. I'm probably overthinking everything." "There's no such thing as overthinking when it comes to poetry," he said, and his eyes held mine for a moment longer than necessary. "Poetry is about what's underneath, the subtext, the things we feel but can't quite say directly." I left that day with my heart pounding, though I couldn't have told you why. I went back to my dorm and lay on my bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation. The way he'd said my name, the way he'd looked at me. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that I was reading things that weren't there, but I couldn't stop thinking about him. In my other classes, I found my mind drifting. I'd be sitting in economics or biology, and suddenly I'd be remembering something Professor Hartwell had said, some insight about language or beauty or truth. I started reading poetry on my own, stuff that wasn't assigned, just because I wanted to understand what he saw in it, wanted to see the world the way he did. October arrived, and with it came the kind of autumn that makes you believe in transformation. The trees in Morningside Park exploded into gold and crimson. The air turned sharp and clear. I found myself walking past Professor Hartwell's office, even when I didn't have a reason to, hoping I might run into him, hoping for another conversation. One evening, I finally knocked on his door during his office hours. He looked up from his desk, and his face brightened in a way that made my breath catch. "Adrian, come in. Sit down. I was just making tea. Would you like some?" His office was exactly what you'd expect from a literature professor who'd been teaching for decades. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves crammed with volumes, their spines cracked and faded from use. A worn leather armchair in the corner, papers and journals stacked everywhere in what appeared to be chaos, but was probably some system only he understood. It smelled like old books and Earl Grey tea and something else, something that was just him. He handed me a cup of tea in a delicate china cup that seemed absurdly civilized for a college office. Our fingers brushed as I took it, and I felt that touch, like electricity. "So," he said, settling into his desk chair and looking at me with those blue eyes. "What's on your mind? And don't say it's just about the Eliot essay. You have that look." "What look?" "The look of someone who has a question they're afraid to ask." I took a sip of tea, buying time, trying to figure out what I was even doing there. "I guess I'm just trying to understand something. In your lecture today, when you were talking about Wilde and aestheticism, you said that beauty is often where we find truth, that art can reveal things about ourselves that we've been hiding from. What did you mean by that?" He was quiet for a moment, studying me with an expression I couldn't read. Then he smiled, but it was different from his classroom smile. More personal, more vulnerable somehow. "I meant that sometimes we don't know who we are until we see ourselves reflected in something beautiful. A poem, a painting, a piece of music. It holds up a mirror and we recognize something we'd been refusing to look at directly. What if what you see scares you? Then you're probably looking at something true." He set down his teacup. "Adrian, may I ask you a personal question? You don't have to answer." My heart was hammering. "Okay. Why did you really come here tonight?" I opened my mouth, then closed it. I had no idea how to answer that, honestly, because I can't stop thinking about you, because when I'm not in your class, the world feels less vibrant, because something is happening to me and I don't understand it, and you're the only person who might. "I don't know," I finally said, which was both a lie and the truest thing I could have said. He nodded slowly, and something passed between us in the silence. some acknowledgement of what we weren't saying. "Well," he said gently, "my door is always open. Literally. These are my office hours after all. I started coming every week. We'd talk about poetry, about literature, about ideas and philosophy and art. But underneath those conversations there was something else growing, something neither of us named but both of us felt. I learned that he'd been teaching at Columbia for 40 years, that he'd never married, that he lived alone in a rent-controlled apartment on the Upper West Side that he'd had since the 1970s. He'd traveled extensively when he was younger, spent a year in Paris, another in Florence. He spoke 4 languages, he played piano. He had a dry, subtle sense of humor that caught you off guard. And slowly, terrifyingly, I realized I was falling in love with him. It wasn't like anything I'd experienced before. I'd dated girls in high school, had a girlfriend my freshman year that fizzled out after a few months. Those had felt like going through the motions, playing the role I thought I was supposed to play. This felt like waking up, like seeing in color for the first time. But he was my professor. He was 73. I was 20. It was impossible in every conceivable way, and yet I couldn't stop my heart from doing what it was doing. November came, and with it a particular assignment that would change everything. Professor Hartwell asked us to write a personal essay about a poem that had changed our life or our understanding of ourselves. I spent days on it, writing and rewriting, trying to find the courage to be honest. I wrote about a Whitman poem, one Professor Hartwell had read in class. I wrote about what it meant to contain multitudes, to be vast and contradictory, to discover that the person you thought you were might not be the person you actually are. I wrote about the terror and the freedom of that realization. I didn't say explicitly what I was really writing about, but anyone reading carefully would understand. When he returned the essays, mine had a simple note at the bottom in his elegant handwriting. "Come see me. We should talk about this." I went to his office that evening with my stomach in knots. He gestured for me to sit, and for a long moment he just looked at me with an expression that was infinitely kind and infinitely sad. "Adrian," he said quietly, "this is a beautiful piece of writing, honest and brave, but I need you to know that I understand what you're really saying." I felt my face burn. "Professor Hartwell, Theodore," he interrupted gently. "When we're alone, please call me Theodore." That simple request felt monumental. "Theodore?" I said, and his name felt strange and wonderful in my mouth. "I need to be very careful here," he continued. "You're my student. I'm your professor. There are rules and ethics and power dynamics that matter enormously. Do you understand that?" I nodded, my throat tight. "But I also need to be honest with you because you were honest with me in this essay." He took a breath. "You're not alone in what you're feeling, and that makes this even more complicated." The world seemed to stop. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I think you're extraordinary. I'm saying that our conversations are the highlight of my week. I'm saying that I'm 73 years old, and I thought I was long past feeling anything like this, and then you walked into my classroom and proved me completely wrong." He ran a hand through his silver hair. "I'm also saying that we can't act on any of this while you're my student. It wouldn't be right. It wouldn't be fair to you." "So what do we do?" "We wait," he said simply. "The semester ends in December. You'll no longer be my student. And then, if you still feel what you feel now, if this isn't just some passing infatuation, we can revisit this conversation. Can you do that? Can you wait?" "Yes," I said, because what else could I say? But also because I knew with absolute certainty that what I felt wasn't going to change in a few weeks. Those last weeks of the semester were torture and bliss in equal measure. Every class, every office hour conversation was charged with this unspoken awareness. We were careful, proper, maintaining all the appropriate boundaries. But underneath there was this current of electricity, this knowledge of what we both wanted and couldn't have yet. The semester ended on a gray December afternoon. I took my final exam, turned it in, and walked out of that lecture hall for the last time as Professor Hartwell's student. I went back to my dorm and waited, unsure what happened next. 2 days later I got an email. Just a few lines. "Adrian, I'm no longer your professor. Would you like to have dinner? Theodore." I wrote back immediately, "Yes." We met at a small Italian restaurant in the village, the kind of place with checkered tablecloths and candles in wine bottles and Frank Sinatra playing softly in the background. I got there first, nervous as hell, second-guessing everything. What was I doing? What did I think was going to happen? Then Theodore walked in, and all my doubts evaporated. He was wearing a dark coat over a gray sweater, and when he saw me, his whole face lit up in a way I'd never seen in the classroom. He crossed to the table and, without hesitation, took my hand in his. "Hi," he said simply. "Hi," I managed. We talked for hours, not about poetry or literature or anything academic. We talked about our lives, our families, our hopes and fears. He told me about growing up in Boston in the 1940s and 50s, about realizing he was gay when that was still dangerous and shameful, about the lovers he'd had over the years and the relationships that hadn't worked out. He told me about the loneliness of getting older, of watching friends die, of wondering if he'd spend his final years alone. I told him about my childhood in suburban Connecticut, about my parents' expectations and my own confusion about who I was supposed to be. I told him that I'd never felt for anyone what I felt for him, that he'd opened up something in me I hadn't known existed. "I'm scared," I admitted. "Not of being with you, of how much I want this." He reached across the table and took my hand again. His skin was warm, his grip steady. "I'm scared too. I'm scared that I'm too old for you, that I can't give you the life you deserve. I'm scared that people will judge you, that this will be hard in ways you can't imagine yet." "I don't care about any of that." "You might, eventually, and that's okay. But Adrian, I need you to know something." His blue eyes held mine. "I haven't felt this alive in decades. You've reminded me that it's not too late for joy, for connection, for love. Whatever happens, however long this lasts, thank you for that." We left the restaurant and walked through the cold December streets, and when we reached a quiet corner, Theodore pulled me close and kissed me. It was gentle and careful, and absolutely perfect, and I felt something click into place inside me, like I'd been a puzzle with a missing piece, and suddenly I was complete. We spent that winter together, navigating what it meant to be in a relationship that existed outside every conventional boundary. He introduced me to his world, took me to museums and concerts and tiny bookshops tucked away in forgotten corners of the city. I introduced him to mine, though my friends were predictably confused, and my parents, when I finally told them, were horrified. "He's 73, Adrian," my mother said on the phone, her voice tight with disapproval. "He's older than your grandfather. What could you possibly have in common?" "Everything," I said simply, and it was true. Theodore never tried to be anything other than who he was. He didn't pretend to be younger, didn't try to keep up with my 20-year-old energy. Instead, he offered me something I'd never had before, a sense of calm, of being fully seen and accepted. With him, I didn't have to perform or pretend. I could just be. We settled into a rhythm. I'd spend nights at his apartment, that rent-controlled place filled with books and art, and the accumulated treasures of a life well lived. We'd cook dinner together, simple meals that we'd eat while talking about everything and nothing. He'd play piano for me, old jazz standards and classical pieces, his fingers still nimble and sure on the keys. We'd read in companionable silence, curled up together on his worn sofa, And yes, we were lovers in every sense of the word. Despite the age difference, despite my inexperience, we found a tenderness and passion that felt sacred. Theodore was patient and generous, teaching me what it meant to be with someone, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually. The years passed faster than I could believe. I graduated, started graduate school, eventually got my own teaching position at a small college in New York. Theodore retired from Columbia, stepping away from the classroom he'd occupied for over 4 decades. We moved in together officially, no longer caring what anyone thought. We traveled, making up for the years we hadn't known each other. We went to Paris and Florence, the cities of his youth. We went to places neither of us had been, exploring the world together. Always, we talked about art and beauty and meaning, about mortality and time and love. As Theodore moved through his 80s, I watched him age with a grace that took my breath away. His hair went from silver to white. His movements became slower, more careful. But his mind stayed sharp, his humor intact, his love for me unwavering. "Do you ever regret this?" he asked me once. We were in our apartment, a lazy Sunday morning, both of us reading the paper in bed. Choosing me, missing out on a more conventional life? I looked at him, at this man who had taught me who I was, who had loved me with a completeness I'd never dreamed possible. "Never," I said, "not for a single second." When Theodore turned 90, we had a small party, just a few close friends, people who had accepted us over the years. He made a speech, his voice still strong despite his age. "I spent most of my life believing that great love was for other people," he said, "that I'd missed my chance, or that I wasn't built for it, or that it simply wasn't in the cards for someone like me. And then, when I was 73 years old, and absolutely certain I knew how my story would end, Adrian walked into my classroom and proved me wrong about everything. He taught me that it's never too late, that love doesn't care about convention or expectation or what makes sense on paper. These last 17 years have been the happiest of my life." I held his hand as he spoke, tears streaming down my face. The call came on a Tuesday morning in March. I was at work in the middle of a lecture when my phone buzzed with a message from Theodore's doctor. I left immediately, my heart in my throat. He'd had a stroke, massive. By the time I got to the hospital, he was already gone. The grief was absolute. I'd known it was coming eventually, we both had, but knowing didn't make it hurt any less. I'd lost my partner, my love, my best friend, the person who had seen me and known me and loved me anyway. The funeral was small, as he'd wanted. I gave the eulogy, though I barely remember what I said. Something about light and love and gratitude. Something about how lucky I'd been to have him, even if it wasn't for as long as I'd wanted. A week later, his lawyer called me in for the reading of the will. I went, numb and exhausted, expecting to hear about donations to Columbia, to arts organizations, to causes he'd cared about. Instead, the lawyer looked at me and said, "Mr. Hartwell left everything to you, Adrian. The apartment, his savings, his books, his entire estate. There's also a letter." I took the envelope with shaking hands. Inside, in Theodore's elegant handwriting, was a letter. "My dearest Adrian," it began. "If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and I hope you're not grieving too terribly. I hope you're remembering the joy, not the ending. I'm leaving you everything because everything I had, everything I was, belonged to you anyway. You gave me 17 years I never expected to have. You loved me when I was old and stubborn and set in my ways. You saw past the age and the difference and all the reasons it shouldn't have worked, and you loved me anyway. Now I need you to do something for me. I need you to keep living, keep teaching, keep reading poetry and finding beauty and opening yourself to possibility. Don't let this grief close you off. You're only 37. You have so much life left. And if you find love again, take it. Don't feel guilty. Don't think you're betraying my memory. I want you to be happy, to be held, to be loved for all the years I won't be there to love you myself. You changed my life, Adrian. You were the answer to a question I'd stopped asking. You were proof that miracles happen, that love is real, that it's never too late for joy. Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for staying. Thank you for 17 years of happiness. I did nothing to deserve, but everything to cherish. All my love, always and forever, Theodore. I sat in that lawyer's office and sobbed, clutching the letter to my chest. And then slowly, I began to understand what he was telling me. That love doesn't end. That the people who change us stay with us, woven into who we become. That grief and gratitude can coexist. It's been 5 years now since Theodore died. I still live in our apartment, surrounded by his books and his art, and the life we built together. I still teach, carrying forward the lessons he taught me about literature and beauty and truth. I've dated a little, though nothing serious yet. Maybe someday. But mostly, I carry him with me. In the way I see the world, in the way I love, in the person I became because of him. People sometimes ask if I regret it, loving someone I knew I'd lose so soon. And I tell them what I told Theodore all those years ago. Never, not for a single second. He was worth every moment of grief, every tear, every ache of loss, because he taught me the most important thing anyone ever could, that love is always worth it, that connection is always worth it, that opening your heart, even when you know it will break, is always, always worth it. Professor Theodore Hartwell walked into my life when I was 20 years old and changed everything. He left me everything in his will, but the truth is, he'd already given me everything that mattered long before that. He gave me himself. He gave me love. He gave me the courage to be who I really am. And that's a legacy worth more than any inheritance could ever be.